Power rarely appears fragile while it is losing flexibility. Institutions can continue issuing orders, collecting taxes, and projecting confidence even as each new decision requires more effort than the last. Stability is often preserved first as reality and only later as narrative. The greater the determination to maintain that narrative, the more difficult it becomes for authority to recognize the pressures gathering beneath it. Few periods reveal this tension more clearly than the later decades of the Roman Empire, when emperors, administrators, and provincial officials struggled not against immediate collapse, but against the growing cost of convincing themselves that stability could still be maintained. Their government continued to function. Their authority remained recognized. Yet beneath that continued operation, every effort to preserve confidence quietly narrowed the choices still available. For centuries, Roman authority rested upon more than military success. It depended upon an administrative system capable of collecting taxes across vast provinces, governors enforcing imperial law, and emperors presenting themselves as guardians of an enduring order. By the 3rd and 4th centuries, the empire remained immense, stretching from Britain to the eastern Mediterranean. Emperors such as Diocletian and later Constantine introduced sweeping administrative reforms intended to strengthen imperial control. Provinces were reorganized, bureaucracies expanded, military commands became more specialized. New capitals reflected shifting strategic priorities, while imperial decrees continued to circulate through an increasingly elaborate governing structure. To many observers, the empire still possessed the institutions necessary to preserve stability. Orders continued to be issued. Officials continued to administer them. Authority remained visible, even as the demands placed upon it steadily increased. The first signs of strain rarely appeared as dramatic failures. They emerged instead through slower responses to familiar problems. Frontier pressures required additional soldiers. Larger armies demanded greater revenue. Greater revenue required more efficient taxation. Each administrative solution expanded responsibilities already stretching across thousands of miles. Officials increasingly managed immediate pressures rather than reducing them. The machinery of government continued moving, but each adjustment created new obligations requiring further intervention. Imperial rulers understood that visible confidence carried political value. Sudden admissions of weakness risked encouraging rivals both inside and beyond imperial borders. Stability, therefore, became something that had to be demonstrated continually. Public ceremonies reinforced imperial legitimacy. Laws reaffirmed authority. Administrative reforms projected competence. Yet these visible affirmations often concealed growing uncertainty within the institutions responsible for enforcing them. Provincial administrators frequently faced conflicting demands. Local conditions required flexibility, while imperial directives increasingly emphasized uniform enforcement. Decisions delayed in one province complicated administration in another. Information traveled more slowly than events themselves. By the time reports reached imperial courts, circumstances had often changed. Authority remained centralized on paper, while practical adaptation became increasingly decentralized through necessity. Regional officials delayed tax assessments, while landowners waited to learn whether new regulations would remain in force. Merchants adjusted prices cautiously, uncertain whether transportation routes or customs requirements might soon change again. Each delay encouraged further administrative caution. Officials hesitated before implementing policies whose long-term consequences remained unclear. The purpose was not indecision, but preservation. Every action carried the possibility of undermining the confidence authorities sought to maintain. Protecting legitimacy increasingly meant postponing choices until clearer circumstances emerged. Unfortunately, clearer circumstances rarely arrived. Military demands intensified this pattern. Border regions required continual reinforcement against shifting external threats. Moving troops from one frontier inevitably weakened another. Recruiting additional soldiers required additional resources from populations already supporting expanding administrative structures. The empire retained impressive military capabilities, but maintaining them required increasingly complex coordination between civilian administrators, provincial governors, and imperial commanders. Rather than reducing commitments, authority often sought to preserve all of them simultaneously. Existing frontiers remained defended. Established cities continued receiving administrative attention. Tax obligations remained formally unchanged even where local economies weakened. The governing assumption was that temporary strain could be managed without fundamentally altering imperial expectations. Stability therefore depended upon maintaining inherited obligations long after the conditions supporting them had begun to change. This approach protected continuity in the short term. Abrupt retrenchment risked signaling weakness. Yet preserving every existing commitment gradually reduced the government's ability to respond creatively to new pressures. Resources became allocated according to previous assumptions rather than emerging realities. Administrative success came to mean sustaining familiar structures instead of adapting them. Communities near frontier regions watched military units arrive, depart, and return again as priorities shifted. Local officials carried out new directives while quietly preparing for the possibility that another decree might soon replace the last. Communication itself became part of the growing burden. Larger bureaucracies produced more reports, more correspondence, and more requests for approval. Information flowed upward through administrative layers before decisions traveled downward again. Each additional level of coordination promised greater oversight while extending the time required for meaningful response. Authority remained informed, yet increasingly after the moment demanding action had already passed. Within imperial government, this produced a subtle distortion. Successful administration became measured less by resolving structural pressures than by preserving procedural order. Officials demonstrated competence through compliance. Emperors evaluated loyalty through implementation. Institutions rewarded continuity because continuity appeared synonymous with stability. Few participants intended to prevent adaptation. Instead, adaptation itself became increasingly difficult within structures designed primarily to preserve consistency. The narrative of enduring imperial strength therefore required constant maintenance. Every successful collection of taxes, every ceremonial procession, every legal proclamation reinforced the image of uninterrupted authority. None of these actions were false. The empire genuinely continued functioning. But each demonstration of stability also increased the political cost of acknowledging that familiar methods no longer produced familiar results. As pressures accumulated, rulers faced narrowing alternatives. Significant reforms risked admitting previous policies had become insufficient. Maintaining existing arrangements demanded ever greater administrative effort. The choice gradually shifted from selecting the best available option to choosing which visible uncertainty could be postponed longest. That narrowing did not produce immediate collapse. Instead, it produced slower correction. Provincial difficulties lingered before receiving attention. Fiscal adjustments arrived after economic conditions had already shifted. Military deployments answered threats that had evolved during the delay itself. Authority remained present across the empire, yet its responses increasingly reflected yesterday's pressures rather than today's realities. Citizens continued obeying imperial regulations because imperial institutions still possessed legitimacy. Officials continued carrying out instructions because the administrative hierarchy still functioned. The empire remained recognizable as an empire. Yet beneath that continuity, flexibility steadily diminished. Stability itself had become increasingly expensive to preserve. The greatest limitation confronting Roman authority was not the absence of institutions, but the growing cost of maintaining confidence in institutions whose capacity for rapid adaptation had quietly narrowed. Recovery still appeared possible. Administrative reforms remained conceivable. Imperial government continued operating with remarkable resilience. Yet each passing year required greater effort simply to sustain the appearance that existing structures remained sufficient for changing circumstances. History often remembers collapse because it offers visible endings. Far less attention is given to the years when authority still stands, decisions still emerge, and institutions continue functioning even as each response arrives slightly later than the last. Those quieter years reveal that stability is not merely something governments possess. It is something they continually spend. And sometimes, the greatest cost is paid long before anyone believes the account is running low. Authority often appears strongest just before its choices begin to narrow. If this exploration stayed with you, you'll find more on timeless questions, where history is examined through the pressures that shape power, systems, and human experience across time. Which matters more to a government under pressure? Preserving confidence today, or preserving flexibility for tomorrow?